The letter arrived with the morning rain, streaking the ink across the page like tears on a woman's face. Jessie Lawford stared at the hastily scrawled words, her husband's final goodbye, as the three sleeping children in the small room behind her remained blissfully unaware that their father had abandoned them all. Jessie's hands trembled as she set the letter down on the rough-hewn kitchen table of their small homestead outside Opal, Wyoming. The year was 1878, and winter was approaching with unforgiving swiftness. Thomas had left in the night, taking their only horse, most of their meager savings, and leaving nothing but a coward's explanation about needing freedom and the lure of gold in the Black Hills. "Mama," a small voice called from the doorway. 8-year-old Sarah stood there, her blonde hair tangled from sleep, clutching her worn rag doll. "Where's Papa?" Jessie quickly wiped her eyes, forcing a smile. "He had to go away for a while, sweetheart." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but she couldn't bear to tell her children the truth just yet. "Let's get you some breakfast, and then we need to wake your brothers." 6-year-old Michael and 4-year-old Daniel would soon be asking the same questions. Jessie moved mechanically through the motions of making breakfast, her mind racing with desperate calculations. The pantry held enough food for perhaps 3 weeks. The firewood would last a month if they were careful. The small amount of money Thomas had left behind would buy supplies for no more than 2 weeks, and winter in Wyoming territory waited for no one. As the children ate their porridge, Jessie tried to form a plan. They couldn't stay here. The homestead was isolated, 5 miles from town, and she had no way to travel back and forth easily. Without Thomas to work their small plot of land and hunt for meat, they wouldn't survive the winter. "We're going to town today," she announced, trying to sound confident. "We'll pack what we need and stay there for a while." "Is Papa meeting us there?" Daniel asked, his brown eyes wide and innocent. Jessie swallowed hard. "No, sweetheart, Papa had to go on a long journey." "When will he be back?" Michael demanded, already old enough to sense something was wrong. "I don't know," Jessie admitted, "but we'll be fine, I promise." The promise felt hollow even as she spoke it. At 27, Jessie had few marketable skills beyond keeping a home and caring for children. In a frontier town like Opal, opportunities for a woman alone were scarce. But she had no choice. They would have to walk to town, carrying what they could, and she would find work somehow. By midday, they were trudging along the rutted dirt road, Jessie carrying Daniel when his short legs tired, while Sarah and Michael helped by carrying small bundles of their belongings. Jessie had packed only what was essential clothing, a few family mementos, and whatever food would travel well. She'd locked the cabin door, though she wondered if they would ever return. The October wind bit through their worn coats, and clouds threatened more rain. Jessie urged the children forward, promising stories and treats once they reached town. In truth, she had no idea where they would stay when they arrived. The small hotel would be beyond their means for more than a night or two. Perhaps someone would take pity on them until she found work. They were still 2 miles from town when the rain began again, a cold, steady downpour that soon had them all shivering. Daniel began to cry, and even stoic Sarah looked miserable. Jessie was about to suggest sheltering under a large tree when she heard the sound of an approaching wagon. The wagon appeared around a bend in the road, drawn by 2 strong horses and driven by a tall man in a wide-brimmed hat. Jessie moved her children to the side of the road, but the wagon slowed as it approached. "Madam," the driver called out, tipping his hat. "You folks shouldn't be out in this weather. Can I offer you a ride into town?" Relief washed over Jessie, though caution made her hesitate. The man appeared to be in his mid-30s, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the sun, but kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "That's very kind of you, sir," she replied. "We would be grateful for a ride." The man jumped down from the wagon with an easy grace. "Name's Grant Langley. Let me help you with your things." "I'm Jessie Lawford. These are my children Sarah, Michael, and Daniel." Grant smiled at the children as he loaded their few possessions into the back of the wagon. "Pleasure to meet you all. There's a dry blanket under the seat there. Might help warm up the little ones." Once they were all settled in the wagon, Grant turned the horses toward town. "If you don't mind my asking, Mrs. Lawford, what brings you and your young ones out in weather like this?" Jessie hesitated, shame and pride warring within her. "We're relocating to town. My husband has gone to seek work elsewhere." The lie came easier this time, protecting what little dignity she had left. Grant nodded, asking no further questions, though something in his expression suggested he understood more than she'd said. "Town's been growing lately. The railroad's bringing in new folks every month. I reckon you'll find your footing there." "I hope so," Jessie replied softly. "Do you know of any lodgings that might be affordable for a family?" Grant was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Peterson at the boarding house is a good woman, but she's full up with railroad workers at present. Hotel's expensive, as you likely know." He seemed to consider something before continuing. "I've got property just outside town. Good-sized house with more rooms than I know what to do with. You'd be welcome to stay there until you sort things out." Jessie stiffened. "That's very kind, Mr. Langley, but I couldn't possibly impose no imposition at all," he interrupted gently. "I'm away most days tending to my cattle. House sits mostly empty. Would be nice to have it put to good use. Why would you offer such kindness to strangers?" Jessie asked, suspicious despite her desperate situation. Grant's expression grew solemn. "Lost my sister and her family to winter hardship 5 years back. They were stranded without help, too far from neighbors. I reckon helping folks in need is how I honor her memory." He glanced at the children huddled under the blanket. "Besides, I've got a house big enough for all of you, and it seems a shame to let it go to waste." Something in his voice, a raw honesty, made Jessie believe him. Still, she hesitated. "I can't accept charity, Mr. Langley. I would need to contribute somehow." "The place could use a woman's touch," Grant said. "Been bachelor kept too long. If you're willing to help with cooking and keeping things in order, I'd consider it fair exchange for lodging." Jessie considered their options. A night or two at the hotel would deplete most of their money. Finding work might take time she didn't have. Winter was coming and her children needed shelter. "Very well, Mr. Langley," she said finally. "We accept your offer temporarily until I can secure more permanent arrangements." Grant nodded, a small smile crossing his face. "Glad to hear it, Mrs. Lawford." The rain continued to fall as they made their way into town. Opal had grown significantly since the railroad came through 2 years earlier, but it was still a frontier settlement at heart. Main Street featured a general store, a hotel, a saloon, a small church, and various other businesses catering to locals and travelers alike. Grant stopped the wagon in front of the general store. "Need to pick up some supplies. Would you and the children like to come in and warm up?" Inside the store, Jessie watched as Grant purchased a substantial amount of food: flour, sugar, coffee, bacon, beans, and other staples. He also added candy sticks for the children, and after a quiet conversation with the shopkeeper, a bolt of warm wool fabric and several skeins of yarn. When Jessie protested that he needn't buy things on their account, Grant simply shook his head. "Winter's coming. Better to be prepared." As they loaded the supplies into the wagon, Jessie noticed several townspeople watching them with curious expressions. A woman in a fine dress approached, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Grant Langley, I didn't know you had company coming," she said, her gaze assessing Jessie and the children. Mrs. Lawford and her children need a place to stay while they settle in town, Grant replied evenly. Seemed the Christian thing to offer them lodging. How generous of you, the woman said, her tone suggesting otherwise. I'm Vivian Edwards, Mrs. Lawford. My husband owns the bank here in Opal. Pleased to meet you, Jessie replied, though the woman's scrutiny made her uncomfortable. Where is your husband? Mrs. Edwards asked directly. Before Jessie could respond, Grant intervened. We should get going before the rain worsens. Good day, Mrs. Edwards. As they drove away, Jessie felt both grateful for Grant's intervention and worried about the impression they'd made. Will that cause problems for you? She asked quietly. Grant shrugged. Vivian Edwards considers herself the arbiter of Opal's social order. Don't you worry about her. Folks here mind their own business mostly. They left town behind, following a well-maintained road for about a mile before turning onto a private drive. As they crested a small hill, Grant's property came into view, and Jessie couldn't suppress a gasp of surprise. The house was far larger than she'd expected, a handsome two-story structure with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Several outbuildings dotted the property, including a large barn, and fenced pastures stretched into the distance. A small creek ran along one side of the property, fed by the mountains visible in the distance. This is your home? Jessie asked, unable to hide her astonishment. Grant nodded. Built it myself with help from friends, had big plans once. Something like sadness flashed across his face before he smiled again. Let's get you folks inside and out of this weather. The interior of the house was clean but sparse, clearly the dwelling of a man who lived alone and spent little time on comforts. The main floor featured a large kitchen with a substantial wood stove, a dining room, a comfortable sitting room with a stone fireplace, and what appeared to be a small study. A staircase led to the second floor. There are 4 bedrooms upstairs, Grant explained. Mine's at the end of the hall. You and the children can take your pick of the others. Bathrooms off the kitchen got running water piped in from the spring last year. This is quite a home for one man, Jessie observed. A shadow crossed Grant's face. Like I said, had different plans once. He didn't elaborate further. I'll bring in your things and get the fires going. Make yourselves at home. While Grant tended to the horses and brought in their belongings, Jessie helped the children settle. Despite their exhaustion, they were excited about the big house, especially when they discovered that one of the bedrooms had clearly been set up for children, with 2 small beds and a crib. Did children live here before? Sarah asked as she ran her hand over a carved wooden horse on a shelf. I don't know, sweetheart, Jessie replied, wondering about the story behind this room that appeared untouched, as if waiting for occupants. When Grant returned with their belongings, Jessie asked hesitantly. The children's room was for my sister's little ones, he answered quietly. They never got to use it. The room's yours now, for as long as you need it. That evening, Jessie insisted on cooking dinner despite Grant's protests that she and the children should rest. She needed to feel useful, to begin repaying his kindness immediately. Using the supplies they'd purchased in town, she prepared a hearty stew with dumplings, fresh bread, and apple cobbler for dessert. The look of appreciation on Grant's face when he tasted the meal was worth the effort. Mrs. Lawford, if you cook like this every night, I may never let you leave, he joked. Mama makes the best food, Michael declared proudly. Papa always said so. An awkward silence fell at the mention of their father. Daniel looked around expectantly. When is Papa coming to this big house? Jessie set down her spoon, realizing she could no longer avoid telling the children the truth. Your father won't be joining us, children. He's gone away and I don't think he'll be coming back. Sarah's eyes widened in understanding. Ever? I don't believe so, sweetheart. Michael's face flushed with anger. He left us. Why would he do that? Sometimes grown-ups make choices that even other grown-ups don't understand, Jessie said carefully, fighting back tears. But we still have each other and we'll be fine. Are we poor now? Sarah asked bluntly. We have less money than before, Jessie admitted. But we're not poor in the ways that matter most. We have each other and we have Mr. Langley's kindness to be thankful for. Grant, who had been silent during this exchange, cleared his throat. Your mama's right. And you're welcome here for as long as you need. My house has been too quiet for too long. That night, after the children were asleep, Jessie sat by the fire in the sitting room, finally allowing herself the luxury of tears. She had kept her composure all day for the children's sake, but now the full weight of their situation crashed down upon her. She didn't hear Grant enter until he spoke. Tea might help, he said quietly, offering her a steaming cup. Jessie hastily wiped her eyes. I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were still awake. No need to apologize. He sat in the chair opposite her, his own cup in hand. It's a lot to bear alone. For a moment, they sat in silence before Jessie spoke again. I should be honest with you, Mr. Langley. My husband didn't leave to find work. He abandoned us, took our savings, our horse, and left a note saying he couldn't bear the responsibility anymore. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. Grant's expression darkened, but his voice remained gentle. Then he's a fool, Mrs. Lawford. Those children are treasures. Please call me Jessie, she said. And thank you not just for your kindness to us, but for not judging me for my husband's failings. Jessie then, and I'm Grant, no Mr. Necessary. He took a sip of his tea. As for judgment, I've seen enough of life to know that good people can find themselves in hard circumstances through no fault of their own. May I ask about your sister? Jessie ventured. You mentioned she had children. Pain flickered across Grant's face. Claire, her husband Robert, and their two little ones. They had a homestead north of here. Winter of '73 was brutal. Blizzard cut them off by the time anyone could reach them. He trailed off, the memory clearly still raw. I'm so sorry, Jessie whispered. That's why I built this house. Was going to convince them to move in with me where it was safer. Too late for that, but I finished it anyway. He stared into the fire. That's why I couldn't just drive past you and the children today, couldn't bear the thought of history repeating itself. Jessie understood then that in helping her family, Grant was perhaps finding some healing for his own wounds. We're grateful more than I can express. Get some rest, Grant said, rising to his feet. Tomorrow's soon enough to start figuring out what comes next. As Jessie climbed the stairs to check on her sleeping children, she felt a curious mixture of grief and hope. Thomas had betrayed them all, leaving them vulnerable in a harsh world. But somehow, against all odds, they had found shelter with a good man who asked nothing in return but the chance to help. For the first time since reading Thomas's letter, Jessie allowed herself to believe they might survive this after all. The following days established a rhythm to their new living arrangement. Grant rose before dawn to tend to his cattle and the other responsibilities of his ranch. Jessie woke nearly as early to prepare breakfast and pack a lunch for him to take. The children adjusted quickly to their new surroundings, especially once they discovered the barn cats and the gentle old dog named Rusty, who followed Grant everywhere. Jessie threw herself into making herself useful, cleaning the long, neglected corners of the house, organizing the pantry and planning meals that would stretch their resources while still providing hearty fare for a working rancher and growing children. The bolt of wool fabric Grant had purchased became warm winter clothing for the children, Jessie's fingers working late into the evenings by lamplight. A week after their arrival, Grant returned from town with surprising news. Spoke with Mrs. "Harper at the Mercantile," he said as they sat down to dinner. "Her assistant is leaving to get married next month. She asked if you might be interested in the position." Jessie looked up in surprise. "Me? But how did she know I was looking for work?" Grant looked slightly embarrassed. "Might have mentioned that you were a capable woman needing employment. Hope you don't mind." "Mind? It's wonderful news. Did she say what the position entails?" "Helping customers, keeping inventory, some bookkeeping if you have the skill for it." "Hours would be reasonable. She knows you have the children." He hesitated. "She can't pay much to start, but it would be something of your own. Independence, exactly what Jessie craved." "When can I speak with her?" "Tomorrow, if you'd like. I can watch the children while you go into town." At Jessie's surprised expression, he added, "I managed a sister and 2 nephews once upon a time. Think I can handle your 3 for a few hours." The next morning, Jessie dressed in her best dress, a simple navy blue cotton that had seen better days but was still presentable. She twisted her chestnut hair into a neat bun and pinned it carefully. "You look pretty, Mama," Sarah said as she helped her mother with the buttons at the back of her dress. "Thank you, sweetheart." Jessie knelt to look her daughter in the eye. "You'll help Mr. Langley with your brothers while I'm gone," Sarah nodded solemnly. "He said we could collect eggs from the chickens and maybe ride the gentle mare if it stops raining." Grant drove Jessie into town, promising to return for her in a few hours. As they approached the main street, Jessie felt her nerves increasing. It had been years since she'd sought employment, not since before she married Thomas. "Mrs. Harper is fair-minded," Grant assured her. "Just be yourself." The Mercantile was the largest store in Opal, selling everything from farm implements to fancy hairpins. Eleanor Harper, a widow in her 50s who had taken over the business after her husband's death 10 years earlier, greeted Jessie warmly. "Mr. Langley speaks highly of you, Mrs. Lawford," she said, gesturing for Jessie to follow her to a small office at the back of the store. "Tell me about your experience." Jessie was honest about her limited work history, but emphasized her organizational skills, basic accounting knowledge from keeping the family books, and determination to learn quickly. To her relief, Mrs. Harper seemed more interested in her character than her resume. "Raising 3 children takes considerable skill," the older woman observed, "and managing a household budget shows practical mathematics ability." She nodded decisively. "I can offer you 3 days a week to start, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, 9 to 4 with an hour for lunch. $15 a month. If things work out, we can discuss increasing your hours after the new year." It wasn't a fortune, but it was far more than Jessie had dared hope for. "That would be wonderful, Mrs. Harper. When would you like me to start?" "Next Tuesday." "That will give Betsy time to show you the ropes before she leaves." Mrs. Harper stood, extending her hand. "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Lawford." As Jessie left the store, her spirits lifted considerably. This job represented the first step toward true independence, toward building a new life for herself and her children. Her good mood faltered slightly when she spotted Vivian Edwards and 2 other well-dressed women watching her from across the street. They whispered among themselves, their disapproving glances making Jessie's cheeks burn. She held her head high as she walked to the place where she'd arranged to meet Grant, but the encounter left her unsettled. Grant noticed her changed mood on the ride home. "Something happened in town." Jessie hesitated before replying. "Mrs. Harper offered me the position. I start next week. That's good news, but something's bothering you." "I saw Mrs. Edwards and some other ladies. They seemed disapproving." Jessie twisted her hands in her lap. "I worry our arrangement might be causing gossip that could harm your reputation." Grant's jaw tightened. "Folks with nothing better to do than gossip aren't worth worrying about. But your standing in the community is based on my character and work, not drawing room chatter. His expression softened. "But I understand your concern. Would it ease your mind if I spoke with Reverend Keller about your situation? He's a good man, not one for gossip, but his approval carries weight." Jessie nodded, grateful for his understanding. "That might help. And perhaps I should look for more permanent lodgings in town once I've saved some money." Grant's hands tightened on the reins. "There's no need for that. I meant what I said about you and the children being welcome for as long as you need." Something in his voice made Jessie look at him more closely. In the 2 weeks since they'd arrived, Grant had transformed from a kind stranger to someone whose presence brought comfort and security. She'd noticed how he took time each day to talk with the children, teaching Michael to whittle, telling Sarah stories about the stars, patiently answering Daniel's endless questions. He was a quiet man, but there was a depth to him that drew her. "Thank you," she said simply. "We're grateful for everything." When they returned home, the children eagerly shared their adventures collecting eggs and helping with chores around the ranch. Watching Grant with her children, Jessie felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the crackling fire in the hearth. That evening, after the children were asleep, Grant invited Jessie to join him on the porch, despite the chill in the air. He wrapped a heavy blanket around her shoulders before settling into the chair beside her. "Beautiful night," he commented, gazing up at the star-filled sky. "Claire and I used to count stars as children. We'd make up stories about the constellations, different from the official ones." "Sarah mentioned you told her star stories today," Grant smiled. "She's a bright girl. Asked more questions than I had answers for. She's always been curious." Jessie pulled the blanket tighter. "All 3 of them seem happier here than they've been in a long time." "Children are resilient," Grant observed, "and they respond to stability and kindness." "Things my husband couldn't provide in the end," Jessie said softly. "I keep wondering where I failed, what I could have done differently to make him stay." Grant turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "A man who abandons his family has a weakness in his character that no wife can fix, Jessie. That failure was his, not yours." His words loosened something tight in Jessie's chest. She had been carrying the weight of Thomas's abandonment as if it were somehow her fault. "How did you become so wise, Grant Langley?" A rueful smile crossed his face. "Not wisdom. Experience. Made enough mistakes of my own to recognize when someone's taking blame that isn't theirs to carry." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, the distant lowing of cattle, the rustle of wind in the trees, the occasional hoot of an owl. "There was a woman once," Grant said suddenly. "Catherine. We were engaged to be married 5 years ago." Jessie remained quiet, sensing this was a story he needed to tell. "When Claire and her family died, I was lost. Threw myself into building this house, expanding the ranch. Didn't have much time or attention for Catherine." His voice grew rough with remembered pain. "She wanted me to stop dwelling on the past, said I was neglecting our future. She wasn't wrong, but I couldn't see it then." "What happened?" "She married the banker's son in Rawlins. They have 3 children now, I hear." Grant's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Another failure to add to my collection." Jessie reached out impulsively to touch his hand. "Grief changes people. She might have been more patient. Maybe, or maybe I wasn't ready to be the husband she needed." He turned his hand to briefly clasp hers before releasing it. "Life doesn't always follow the path we expect." "No," Jessie agreed, thinking of her own journey. "But sometimes an unexpected path leads somewhere worthwhile." Grant's gaze met hers, something unspoken passing between them before he looked away. "Getting late. You should get some rest before those young ones wake you at dawn." As Jessie prepared for bed that night, she found herself thinking of Grant, his kindness, his quiet strength, the way sorrow had shaped but not broken him. For the first time since Thomas left, she allowed herself to wonder if perhaps there might someday be room in her heart for another chance at love. Jessie began her new position at Harper's Mercantile the following Tuesday. Despite her initial nervousness, she found the work engaging and Mrs. Harper to be a patient employer. The store served as Opal's social hub, and Jessie quickly learned more about the town and its inhabitants through customer interactions than she could have discovered in months on her own. Most patrons were polite, if curious about the new woman in town. A few, particularly friends of Vivian Edwards, treated her with cool reserve. But the majority of Opal's citizens were hardworking people who understood life's hardships and held no judgment for a woman supporting her children. Grant had spoken with Reverend Keller as promised, and the minister had paid a cordial visit to Grant's home the previous Sunday. He'd been warm and welcoming to Jessie and the children, inviting them to attend services and join the church community. His obvious approval of their living arrangement seemed to quell the worst of the gossip. As October gave way to November, the temperatures dropped sharply. The first snow fell, transforming the landscape into a glistening white expanse that delighted the children but reminded Jessie of winter's dangers on the frontier. She was profoundly grateful for the solid walls of Grant's house and the abundant firewood he had stockpiled. Grant himself had become increasingly busy as winter approached, working from dawn until dusk to ensure his cattle and property were prepared for the harsh weather. Despite his exhaustion, he always made time for the children in the evenings, often reading to them or teaching them games from his own childhood. Jessie watched their growing attachment to Grant with mixed emotions. Their easy acceptance of him as a stable presence in their lives was healing to witness, but she worried about what would happen when it came time for them to move on. She had saved nearly every penny of her earnings, determined to establish their independence, yet the thought of leaving Grant's home brought an unexpected ache to her heart. One evening in mid-November, as a particularly fierce storm howled outside, Daniel asked the question Jessie had been dreading. "Mr. Grant," the 4-year-old said as they sat by the fire after dinner, "are you going to be our new papa?" The room fell silent. Sarah and Michael looked up from the checkers game Grant had been teaching them, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and hope. Grant's eyes met Jessie's across the room, surprise evident in his face. "That's not something for me to decide, Daniel," he said gently. "That would be up to your mama, and it's not something folks rush into." Jessie's cheeks burned with embarrassment. "It's bedtime, children. Say good night to Mr. Langley." Later, after the children were asleep, Jessie returned downstairs to find Grant still sitting by the fire, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry about Daniel's question," she said, taking a seat across from him. "Children don't understand the complexities of adult relationships." Grant swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "No need to apologize. It's natural for children to want security." He hesitated before continuing. "I hope you know I'd never presume anything, Jessie. Your staying here comes with no expectations." "I know that," she assured him. "You've been nothing but honorable, but I still feel I should clarify my plans." She took a deep breath. "I've been saving my wages. Once I have enough, I intend to find a small place in town for me and the children. I can't impose on your generosity indefinitely." Something like disappointment flickered across Grant's face before he nodded. "Of course, that's sensible planning." He set his glass down. "But know this, you and the children are not an imposition. This house hasn't felt like a home in years, not until you all filled it with life again." The raw honesty in his voice made Jessie's heart beat faster. "Grant," he stood abruptly, It's been a long day. I should turn in. Early start tomorrow. Jessie watched him go, confusion and unnamed feelings swirling within her. Grant Langley had become important to her in ways she hadn't anticipated, and the thought of leaving the safety and warmth of his home, of his presence, left her feeling adrift. The next morning brought clear skies and bitter cold. Grant left before dawn as usual, but when he returned mid-morning, his expression was grim. "Storm damaged the north fence line," he reported as he warmed his hands by the kitchen stove. "Need to repair it before the cattle stray too far. Might be gone overnight. Is there anything I can do to help?" Jessie asked, concerned by the worry lines etched on his face. "Already sent word to the Wilsons' place. Their boys will give me a hand." He hesitated. "But if you wouldn't mind, there's a rifle in my study. Keep it handy while I'm gone. Wolves have been spotted near the Peterson place." Jessie nodded, understanding the seriousness of the situation. "We'll be careful. Do you have everything you need for a night in the cold?" "I'll be fine." He managed a tired smile. "Been surviving Wyoming winters since before you were born." "You're not that much older than me, Grant Langley," Jessie retorted, trying to lighten the mood. "And I've packed food for you and the Wilson boys." She handed him a sack containing bread, cheese, jerky, and a jar of coffee. Gratitude softened his features. "Thank you." He reached out as if to touch her face, then seemed to think better of it, letting his hand fall to his side. "I'll be back by tomorrow evening at the latest." After Grant departed, Jessie tried to keep the children occupied with indoor activities as the temperature continued to drop. She found the rifle where Grant had indicated and placed it near the back door, out of the children's reach but accessible if needed. That night, the wind increased to a howl, rattling the windows and sending drafts through even the well-built house. Jessie added extra blankets to the children's beds and stoked the fires higher than usual, but sleep eluded her as she worried about Grant out in the elements. Shortly before dawn, she was startled awake by a pounding on the front door. Heart racing, she grabbed the rifle and moved cautiously to the entrance, calling out, "Who's there?" "Jessie, it's me." Grant's voice came through the door, strained and breathless. "Need help?" She flung the door open to find Grant supporting a young man she didn't recognize, both of them covered in snow and shivering violently. The stranger's face was alarmingly pale, and blood stained the makeshift bandage on his leg. "Luke Wilson," Grant explained tersely as he helped the injured man inside. "Caught in a rock slide. Think his leg's broken." Jessie sprang into action, directing them to the sofa in the sitting room where they could lay Luke down. She stoked the fire to blazing and fetched blankets, while Grant cut away the young man's blood-soaked pant leg to reveal a nasty compound fracture. "Need to set this before we can get him to town for the doctor," Grant said grimly. He looked at Jessie. "I'll need your help." Luke, barely conscious, moaned in pain. He couldn't have been more than 19 or 20, Jessie realized as she prepared clean bandages and hot water. "What can I do?" she asked, pushing aside her squeamishness at the sight of the bloody wound. "Hold him steady while I set the bone," Grant instructed, his voice calm despite the gravity of the situation. "Then we'll need to splint it before moving him." Jessie positioned herself to hold Luke's shoulders while Grant prepared to manipulate the broken bone. "Luke," she said firmly, trying to capture the young man's attention. "This will hurt, but we need to set your leg. Bite down on this." She placed a folded leather belt between his teeth. The crack of bone against bone as Grant forced the broken ends back into alignment made Jessie's stomach lurch, but she held firm as Luke bucked against the pain, his scream muffled by the belt. Once the bone was set, Grant worked quickly to splint the leg with strips of wood and torn sheets. "Good work," he told Jessie as they finished. "He's young and strong. Should heal clean if we can get him to Doc Phillips today. Dawn was breaking as they completed their makeshift medical treatment. Luke had passed out from the pain, which was perhaps a blessing. Jessie made strong coffee while Grant cleaned up, both of them moving with the efficiency of a crisis weathered together. "What happened to the other Wilson boy?" Jessie asked when they finally sat down at the kitchen table. "Jed went for help when the slide happened, but got turned around in the storm. I found Luke pinned under rocks and got him free, but couldn't risk moving him far in the dark." Grant rubbed his bloodshot eyes. "Found shelter in an old line shack for most of the night, but his fever was rising. Had to get him here." "You saved his life," Jessie said softly, noticing for the first time the deep gash on Grant's temple and the way he cradled his left arm. "You're hurt too," he shrugged. "Nothing serious." Jessie moved to examine his injuries despite his protests. The cut on his head needed cleaning but wasn't deep enough for stitches. His arm, however, was badly bruised, possibly sprained. "You should have mentioned this sooner," she scolded gently as she wrapped his arm in a supportive bandage. "Luke's injuries were more pressing," Grant replied, though he didn't pull away from her ministrations. Their faces were close as she worked, and Jessie was acutely aware of his breathing, the warmth of his skin under her fingers, the way his eyes followed her movements. For a moment after she finished bandaging his arm, neither of them moved away. "Jessie," Grant said, his voice rough with something more than exhaustion. The sound of Sarah calling from upstairs broke the moment. "Mama! Is someone crying?" Jessie stepped back, suddenly flustered. "The children are waking. I should explain what's happening." By mid-morning, they had made arrangements to transport Luke to town. Jed Wilson had arrived with their father, having found their way to the ranch in daylight. The Wilson patriarch was profusely grateful to Grant and Jessie for their care of his son. "Doc Phillips is a good man," Mr. Wilson assured them as they carefully loaded Luke into their wagon. "He'll set that leg proper, and the boy will be right as rain come spring." He clasped Grant's hand firmly. "You saved my son, Langley. Won't forget that." After the Wilsons departed, Grant finally allowed himself to rest. The strain of the night's ordeal showed in the lines of his face and the careful way he moved. Jessie insisted he lie down while she managed the children and the chores. "You're as stubborn as any man I've met, Jessie Lawford," Grant grumbled, though he eventually conceded to rest on the sofa where he could hear the children's voices as they played nearby. Watching him finally surrender to exhaustion, Jessie felt a surge of emotion that she could no longer deny was deeper than gratitude or friendship. Grant Langley was a good man, brave, kind, and steadfast. The thought of leaving his home to establish her independence suddenly seemed less important than it had just days before. As November gave way to December, life at the ranch settled into a comfortable routine. Jessie continued working at the mercantile, saving her wages and enjoying the growing sense of community she felt in Opal. The children thrived in their new environment, with Sarah attending the small schoolhouse in town, and Michael set to join her after the new year. Grant's injured arm healed quickly, and he returned to his regular duties around the ranch. If he sometimes looked at Jessie with an intensity that made her heart race, neither of them acknowledged it aloud. There seemed to be an unspoken agreement between them to maintain the careful boundaries of their arrangement. The approach of Christmas brought excitement to the children. Jessie worried about providing gifts with her limited resources, but Grant assured her that the holiday would be special regardless. One evening in mid-December, he returned from town with a magnificent pine tree strapped to his wagon. "Thought the young ones might enjoy decorating it," he said casually, as if hauling a 12-foot tree through the snow was a small matter. The children's delight as they helped set up the tree in the sitting room was worth every effort. Grant produced a box of ornaments from the attic, delicate glass balls, carved wooden figures, and paper stars that had belonged to his family for generations. "My mother made these," he explained, showing Sarah a collection of fabric angels with carefully stitched faces. "And these," he continued, displaying wooden soldiers and animals, "my father carved during winter evenings." "They're beautiful," Jessie said, carefully hanging a painted glass ball on a branch. "Thank you for sharing them with us." Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Jessie worked by lamplight on secret Christmas presents: a rag doll for Sarah, a carved wooden horse for Michael that Grant had helped her make, and a soft stuffed bear for Daniel. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't hear Grant enter the sitting room. "You should rest," he said softly. "You've been working all day." Jessie looked up with a smile. "Just finishing Sarah's doll. I want everything to be ready for Christmas morning." Grant sat beside her, watching as her needle moved deftly through the fabric. "You're a good mother, Jessie. Your children are fortunate." "We're all fortunate that you took us in," she replied, tying off a thread. "I don't know what would have become of us otherwise." "You'd have found your way," Grant said confidently. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." Jessie set aside her sewing to look at him directly. "Perhaps, but I'm grateful it wasn't tested." She hesitated before adding, "The children consider this their home now. I worry sometimes about how they'll adjust when we eventually move to town." Grant was quiet for a long moment. "What if you didn't have to move?" Jessie's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "I mean." Grant seemed to struggle for words. "This house is too big for one person. It was meant for a family." "Grant, I'm not suggesting anything improper," he hurried to clarify. "But perhaps we could formalize an arrangement. You and the children stay on, you continue your work in town if you wish, and the house becomes a proper home again." Disappointment washed over Jessie, though she wasn't entirely sure what she had expected him to say. "As your housekeeper, you mean?" Grant frowned. "No, that's not." He stood abruptly, pacing to the fireplace. "Forget I spoke. It was a foolish idea." "It wasn't foolish," Jessie said quietly. "But I think we might be talking about different things." Grant turned to look at her, something vulnerable in his expression. "What are you talking about, Jessie?" She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I'm talking about the way you look at me sometimes when you think I don't notice. I'm talking about the way I feel when you're near, or the way the children light up when you come home each evening." She stood, moving closer to him. "I'm talking about the possibility of more than an arrangement of convenience." Grant's eyes never left hers as she approached. "I told myself it was too soon," he said, his voice low. "That you needed time to heal from your husband's betrayal, that you deserved your independence after being abandoned." He reached out, tentatively touching her cheek. "But the truth is, Jessie Lawford, I've been falling in love with you since that rainy day I found you on the road." The words hung in the air between them, a confession that changed everything. Jessie leaned into his touch, her own hand coming up to cover his. "I tried to tell myself it was just gratitude I felt," she admitted. "That it would be foolish to trust my heart again so soon, but it's more than that, Grant. Much more." His arms encircled her then, drawing her against his chest in an embrace that felt like coming home. Jessie closed her eyes, savoring the solid strength of him, the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. "I don't want you and the children to leave," Grant murmured against her hair. "Ever." Jessie looked up at him, hope and uncertainty mingling in her heart. "What are you saying exactly?" Grant stepped back slightly, though he kept hold of her hands. "I'm saying I love you, Jessie. I love Sarah, Michael, and Daniel too. I want us to be a family properly, honorably." His expression was solemn. "I'm asking if you might consider marrying me, not out of necessity or convenience, but because there could be something wonderful between us." Joy bloomed in Jessie's chest, but caution tempered her response. The children have already lost one father. If we were to marry, they would see you as their papa in truth. There would be no turning back. I understand that responsibility, Grant said seriously, and I welcome it. Those children have claimed pieces of my heart just as surely as you have. Jessie studied his face, seeing nothing but sincerity in his eyes. Then yes, Grant Langley, I will marry you not because we need your house or your protection, but because I love you. His smile was radiant as he drew her close again, his lips finding hers in a kiss that promised a future neither of them had dared imagine just months before. They agreed to tell the children on Christmas morning. The proposal would be Grant's gift to the family, with a proper wedding to follow in the spring when travel would be easier for those coming from a distance. Christmas Eve brought a gentle snowfall that blanketed the ranch in pristine white. The house smelled of pine boughs and cinnamon, and candles glowed in every window. After attending the Christmas Eve service at the little church in Opal, they returned home for a special supper of roast chicken, sweet potatoes, and apple pie. The children were nearly too excited to sleep, but eventually succumbed after Grant read The Night Before Christmas by the light of the Christmas tree candles. Christmas morning dawned clear and bright. Jessie woke early to prepare a special breakfast, her heart light with anticipation. Grant joined her in the kitchen, stealing a kiss when she least expected it. "Nervous?" he asked, helping her set the table. "A little," she admitted, "but mostly just happy." The children's excited voices soon filled the house as they discovered their stockings filled with candy, nuts, and small toys. After breakfast, they gathered around the Christmas tree for the exchange of gifts. Sarah was delighted with her new doll. Michael immediately began racing his wooden horse across the floor, and Daniel clutched his stuffed bear tightly. They had made gifts for Jessie and Grant as well. Sarah had embroidered handkerchiefs. Michael had helped Grant make a wooden spice rack for Jessie, and Daniel had contributed colorful drawings of what he called our family. When all the presents seemed to have been opened, Grant cleared his throat. "There's one more gift," he said, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. "It's for all of you." The children looked around curiously, but there were no more packages under the tree. Grant knelt on the floor to be at eye level with the children. "Sarah, Michael, Daniel, I have grown to care for you very much over these past months. You and your mother have made this house feel like a home again." He reached for Jessie's hand, drawing her closer. "I have asked your mother to marry me, to let me be a father to you if you'll have me." There was a moment of stunned silence before Sarah asked, "Would you be our real papa then?" "I would," Grant confirmed, "in every way that matters." "Would we still live here?" Michael wanted to know. "Yes, this would be our home, always." Daniel, never one for lengthy consideration, launched himself into Grant's arms. "I want you to be my papa." Sarah and Michael exchanged glances before breaking into wide smiles and joining the embrace. Jessie watched, tears of joy streaming down her face as the man she loved held her children with such tenderness. "What do we call you now?" Sarah asked when the excitement had calmed somewhat. Grant looked at Jessie, deferring to her judgment. She nodded encouragingly. "You can call me Papa if you'd like," he said gently, "but only when you're ready." It was Michael who tested the word first. "Papa," he said cautiously, as if trying on a new coat. A smile spread across his face. "I think it fits." News of their engagement spread quickly through Opal. Most townsfolk offered hearty congratulations, though Vivian Edwards and her circle remained coolly polite. Mrs. Harper gave Jessie a knowing smile and assured her that her position at the mercantile would remain available if she wished to continue working after the wedding. Reverend Keller visited to discuss their plans, offering to perform the ceremony in the church when spring arrived. "It does my heart good to see love bloom from difficult circumstances," he told them. "The Lord works in mysterious ways." As winter deepened, bringing January's harshest weather, the ranch became a cocoon of warmth and happiness for the growing family. Grant began teaching Michael the basics of ranching, and Sarah often accompanied Jessie to town, proudly announcing to anyone who would listen that Mr. Langley was going to be her papa soon. One evening, as a blizzard raged outside, the family gathered in the sitting room. Grant and Jessie sat side by side on the sofa while the children sprawled on the rug before the fire, playing with the Christmas gifts they still treasured. "I received a letter today," Jessie said quietly, "from Thomas." Grant tensed beside her. "What did he want?" "He's in Colorado. The gold didn't pan out. He asked for money." Jessie's voice was steady as she added, "And he suggested he might come back to see the children sometime. After abandoning them, after leaving you to fend for yourselves in winter." Grant's anger was evident in the tightness of his jaw. "What did you tell him?" "I haven't replied yet. I wanted to discuss it with you first." Jessie glanced at the children, ensuring they were absorbed in their play before continuing. "They have a right to know their father, don't they?" Grant was silent for a long moment. "Yes," he finally said. "But on our terms, not his. If he truly wants to make amends, he'll respect boundaries and prove himself trustworthy first." Jessie nodded, relieved by his measured response. "I'll write to him tomorrow. Tell him that we're well, that the children are thriving, that I'm to be married in the spring." She took Grant's hand, and that if he wishes to see them, it must be with proper notice and assurance that he won't disappear again. "You're a better person than I am," Grant said softly. "I'd have told him to stay in Colorado." "No," Jessie smiled. "You'd have done exactly as I'm doing, because you always consider what's best for the children." The blizzard continued for 3 days, isolating the ranch but causing no real hardship thanks to Grant's careful preparations. When the skies finally cleared, the accumulated snow reached the windowsills, and it took Grant and 2 ranch hands most of a day to clear paths to the barn and outbuildings. February brought milder weather and accelerated wedding preparations. Jessie, with Sarah's help, began work on a wedding dress using fine blue silk that Grant had secretly ordered from Denver. Mrs. Harper organized a quilting bee where the women of Opal created a wedding quilt as a gift for the couple. As March approached, bringing the first signs of spring, Jessie received another letter from Thomas. This one was different, contrite, acknowledging his failures, asking not for money but for forgiveness. He expressed no intention of interfering in their new life, but asked only for occasional letters about the children's welfare. "You believe him?" Grant asked after reading the letter. "I'm not sure," Jessie admitted, "but it costs us nothing to send occasional news of the children. And perhaps someday, when they're older, they might want to know him." Grant nodded his agreement, though Jessie could see the protective concern in his eyes. She loved him all the more for his willingness to navigate this complicated situation with grace rather than resentment. Their wedding day dawned clear and warm, the first truly spring-like day of the year. Opal's small church was filled to capacity with townsfolk, neighboring ranchers, and even Mrs. Edwards, whose frosty attitude had thawed somewhat over the winter. Jessie wore her blue silk dress, her hair adorned with white flowers that Sarah had helped arrange. The children stood proudly beside them as Reverend Keller conducted the ceremony, with Daniel only occasionally fidgeting during the longer prayers. When it came time for the vows, Grant's voice was steady and sure. "I, Grant Langley, take you, Jessie Lawford, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love, honor, and cherish you all the days of my life. I promise to be a father to your children, to protect and guide them as my own. Where there was emptiness, you have brought fullness. Where there was silence, you have brought laughter. I give you my heart, my home, and my name from this day forward." Tears blurred Jessie's vision as she responded. "I, Jessica Lawford, take you, Grant Langley, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love, honor, and cherish you all the days of my life. When we were lost, you found us. When we needed shelter, you opened your home and your heart. You have shown me that love can be steady and true, that promises can be kept. I give you my trust, my devotion, and my love from this day forward." After Reverend Keller pronounced them husband and wife, Grant kissed her with a tenderness that spoke of promises kept and a future bright with possibility. The children cheered, Daniel jumping up and down with such enthusiasm that even the most solemn members of the congregation couldn't suppress their smiles. The celebration continued at the ranch, where tables had been set up in the yard, and a feast prepared by the women of Opal awaited the guests. There was music and dancing well into the evening, with Grant proving to be a surprisingly graceful dancer despite his usual reserve. As the sun began to set, painting the Wyoming sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Grant found Jessie watching the children playing with the other youngsters. "Happy, Mrs. Langley?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "And you? This morning I had a house," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "Tonight I have a home." He turned her gently to face him. "Thank you for that gift." Later that evening, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Grant carried Jessie across the threshold of the bedroom that would now be theirs. The awkwardness that might have existed between them dissolved in the certainty of their love and the promise of their shared future. "I love you, Jessie Langley," Grant whispered as he held her close. "And I love you," she replied, knowing that in this man's arms she had found not just shelter from a storm, but a harbor for her heart. Epilogue: 1 year later, the early morning sunlight streamed through the bedroom window, rousing Jessie from a peaceful sleep. Grant's side of the bed was already empty, but she could hear his deep voice from the kitchen below, mixed with the excited chatter of the children. At the foot of the bed, a cradle held their 3-month-old son, James, still sleeping soundly. Jessie smiled at the sight of his tiny face, so like his father's in the shape of his brow and chin. The past year had brought more joy than she had ever thought possible. The ranch had prospered under Grant's careful management, and the children had blossomed in the security of their new family. Sarah, now 9, was at the top of her class in school. Michael had become Grant's shadow, learning the ways of ranching with enthusiasm. 6-year-old Daniel had started school and was making friends easily with his outgoing nature. Jessie still worked at the mercantile 2 days a week, having discovered she enjoyed the connection to the community. Her position had expanded to include managing the accounts, a responsibility Mrs. Harper was gradually turning over to her as she contemplated retirement. Thomas had kept his word, remaining in Colorado but sending occasional letters and small gifts for the children's birthdays. Grant had shown remarkable generosity of spirit in his willingness to allow this connection, understanding that the children's well-being was paramount. Little James stirred in his cradle, and Jessie rose to lift him into her arms. His eyes, the same warm brown as Grant's, blinked up at her as she cradled him close. "Good morning, my sweet boy," she murmured, kissing his downy head. "Shall we go find your father and siblings?" Downstairs, she found Grant making pancakes while the children set the table. He looked up as she entered, his face lighting with the smile that still made her heart skip a beat. "There's my beautiful wife and son," he said, setting down the spatula to come greet them. He kissed Jessie softly before taking James from her arms, lifting the baby high to elicit a gurgle of delight. "And how's my boy this morning? Ready to help your old man check the north pasture today?" "He's a bit young for ranch work," Jessie laughed. "Never too early to learn," Grant replied with a wink. "Right, children. Right, Papa." The three older children chorused, the word flowing naturally now, filled with love and trust. As they gathered around the table for breakfast, Jessie looked at the faces of her family, the three children who had weathered abandonment and uncertainty, the husband who had opened his home and heart to them, and the baby who represented their shared future. From the depths of despair on that rainy day when Thomas's letter had shattered her world, she had found her way to this moment of perfect contentment. Outside, the vast Wyoming landscape stretched to the horizon, beautiful and sometimes harsh, much like life itself. But within these walls, they had built something enduring, a family forged not just by blood or circumstance, but by choice and love. Grant caught her gaze across the table and smiled, as if reading her thoughts. "Everything all right," Jessie nodded, returning his smile. "Everything is perfect." And it was.